Have you ever said yes when every cell in your body screamed no? Not because you were being noble, but because you didn't want to lose someone, disappoint them, or be judged. And when it was over, you didn't feel proud. You felt depleted, not stronger, just smaller. You told yourself you were keeping the peace, that you were being mature, that you were handling it like a man. But if you are honest, it wasn't peace you were protecting. It was perception. It was control, not over the situation, but over how others saw you. And that, right there, is the first crack in your internal leadership. Let me ask you directly. When was the last time you made a decision, not from clarity, but from guilt, fear, or the need to be accepted? If that moment comes to mind, then don't scroll. Don't skip. Leave a comment right now. This hit me harder than I expected. Because that moment of honesty, that's how real command begins. You see, most people think manipulation looks like shouting, gaslighting, or overt control, but the most dangerous kind is silent. It looks like you deciding. It feels like you're in charge until you realize you're just reacting. You say yes because you've been emotionally conditioned to please. You apologize, not because you're wrong, but because you're afraid of conflict. You overextend, not out of generosity, but because somewhere deep down, you've been taught that your worth is tied to your usefulness. This isn't about weakness, it's about wiring. As a boy, you were praised for being easy, quiet, agreeable. You learned that love came when you made others comfortable, not when you spoke your truth. And now, as a grown man, that training still governs your choices. But now, the stakes are higher. Now you're running teams, making deals, building families, while still carrying the emotional programming of someone afraid to be disliked. Let's call this what it is. You've been manipulated, not because you're incapable, but because you were never taught how to lead yourself first. Every time you say yes while your gut screams no, you're not just betraying your instincts, you're signaling to the world that your boundaries are negotiable, that your leadership is externally calibrated. But Stoic philosophy demands the opposite. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The man who can't lead his own emotions can't lead anyone else for long. And that's why we're here. Not to rage, not to blame, but to reclaim, to trace the strings that have been pulling your decisions in silence and cut every last one of them. So before we begin, one more honest question. When was the last time you did something? Not because it was right, but because you were afraid of losing approval. Think on that. And if it stings, good. That means you're waking up. Let's begin. When strength becomes a target, manipulation doesn't look evil. It looks familiar. You probably don't think you've been manipulated. After all, you're the one who makes decisions. You lead projects. You fix problems. You keep people calm. You've built things from the ground up. How could you possibly be the one getting played? But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more capable you are, the more valuable you become. Not just to your team or your family, but to manipulators. They don't seek out weak people. They seek out strong ones, who are too busy to notice they're being drained, who carry the weight of others out of habit, who don't want to make a big deal out of emotional discomfort. That's you. And that's how it starts. It doesn't begin with control. It begins with observation. They study your strengths, but more importantly, your blind spots. Your need to be seen as reasonable, your resistance to disappointing people, your tendency to absorb pressure so others don't have to feel it. And then, piece by piece, they start shaping your reactions, not through force, through suggestion, through tone, through timing, through silence. Suddenly, you're adjusting your calendar because they really need you. You're rewriting your message 3 times to avoid sounding harsh. You're saying yes to things that no longer serve your mission, but feel like obligations. And here's the scariest part. You don't realize it's happening because you still feel like the one in control. That's what makes manipulation so effective. It doesn't take away your power, it makes you redirect it. Away from your purpose, away from your clarity, towards someone else's emotional agenda. And by the time you notice, it's already cost you. Not in money, in mental clarity, not in reputation, in inner alignment. I once knew a founder, Jonathan Wren, sharp, principled, unshakable until he wasn't. He didn't fall because someone shouted louder. He fell because he ignored the subtle shifts, the small favors, the gentle guilt, the lingering pauses that made him question his own tone. By the time he saw the pattern, he had already started making decisions that pleased others, but betrayed himself. We'll come back to his story soon. For now, remember what the Stoics warned. If you don't know what your soul is anchored to, the winds of others will carry it anywhere. Epictetus. Let's be clear, manipulation isn't always malicious. Sometimes it comes from people who are lost themselves, people who need your stability to avoid confronting their own chaos, but intent doesn't erase impact. And here's the paradox of leadership. The more others rely on you, the less you feel entitled to say no. The more calm you appear, the more people assume you're never close to breaking. The more you protect others from their storms, the more they expect you to do it, without complaint, without rest, without limits. But leadership is not martyrdom. You were never meant to sacrifice your inner compass for outer harmony. The real danger isn't manipulation itself, it's your silence in the face of it, your tendency to adapt instead of confront, to carry the weight instead of questioning where it came from. And if you don't correct that pattern, you'll wake up years from now with a list of achievements, but no peace, surrounded by people who respect your role, but never truly respected you. That's not stoic, that's self-erasure. And it ends now. The Mind Hijack. The wounds that make you vulnerable aren't visible, they're emotional, and they were opened long before the world ever noticed your strength. We're told that strong men don't get manipulated, that leaders don't fall for emotional games. But here's what no one tells you. The more emotionally responsible you become, the easier it is for others to lay their emotional weight on you. And over time, without even noticing, you become a silent beast of burden, holding it all, absorbing it all. Not because you're weak, but because you were conditioned to carry. Let's go deeper. There are 3 wounds that manipulators look for, 3 invisible levers they pull, and if you don't become aware of them, they will drive your decisions, not your mind. 1. The guilt of saying no. You were taught early on that good people don't refuse, that kindness is measured by how often you self-abandon, so you say yes, even when it drains you. You listen, even when your energy is gone. You stay, even when you know you should walk away. And when you finally try to say no, it feels like betrayal. Not of them, but of the identity you built. I'm the one people can count on. That sounds noble, but in reality, it becomes a script others quickly learn to exploit. Because if guilt drives your choices, you're not leading, you're managing perception. And manipulators know they don't need to push. They just need to look disappointed, and you'll surrender. Stoicism teaches, never be a slave to the opinion of others, even if those others live inside your head. 2. The fear of disconnection. Even leaders feel it, the fear of being replaced, of being left, of losing the role, the bond, the identity that makes us feel valuable. So you overgive, you soften your truth, you compromise values just to keep it together. And suddenly, you're no longer leading the moment. You're chasing it. Trying to preserve something that no longer reflects your clarity. Manipulators sense this. They weaponize uncertainty. They say things like, if you do that, don't expect me to stay. If you walk away, you'll regret it. They don't trap you physically. They trap you in narratives of loss and let your fear do the rest. But the Stoic man doesn't cling, he stands. Because connection built on fear isn't connection. It's dependency in disguise. 3. The hunger for validation. This is the hardest one to admit, especially for achievers. You've built. You've sacrificed. You've outlasted others. But deep down, there's still a whisper. Do they see me? Do they value me? And that whisper makes you vulnerable to praise, to admiration, to people who mirror back your strengths. Just to gain your loyalty, you start bending for the compliment. You start performing for the approval. You start overcompensating, not because you're unsure, but because you still need someone to say, you matter. And once that hook is in, they can reel you anywhere. But as Marcus Aurelius wrote, it is not the applause of others that should define your worth, but the silence within you when you know you've acted with integrity. These wounds are not your fault, but they are now your responsibility. Because if you don't address them, if you don't see how they shape your reactions, you'll keep calling it patience. Keep calling it professionalism. Keep calling it peace. When in truth, you're just afraid to disappoint. Afraid to let go. Afraid to stand alone with your clarity. The Stoic path, and the path of real leadership, requires a brutal kind of honesty. One that says, I will not earn love through sacrifice. I will not buy peace by selling my voice. I will not lead others while being led by emotional wounds I refuse to confront. This isn't about blame. This is about command. And it begins where most men fear to look, within. The Manipulator's Playbook. A manipulator doesn't need to shout to control you. All they need is access to the one place you never truly questioned, your emotional blind spot. They don't overpower you. They study you. They don't coerce you. They calibrate. And the brilliance of their game lies in its subtlety. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like connection. It feels like care. It feels like someone who just wants what's best for you. But what's really happening is more dangerous. They're not taking your will. They're activating your guilt, feeding your fear, and rewarding your quiet hunger for validation. And when those old wounds are still bleeding, you don't resist. You adjust. You explain. You shrink. And the worst part? You call it growth. That's how manipulation wins, not by pressure, but by invitation. So let's get honest about the tactics, not the loud ones, the elegant ones, the ones that hijack your clarity while making you feel noble for going along. Take strategic empathy, for example. They don't demand, they endear. They make you feel special, chosen, needed. You're the only one who understands me. You're all I have. No one else makes me feel safe. And at first it feels meaningful. You think you've earned trust. But soon, it becomes emotional responsibility. You begin sacrificing your time, your peace, your boundaries, not because you're in love, but because you're terrified of what might happen to them if you stop holding them together. That's not loyalty. That's emotional debt disguised as devotion. Then there's calculated disappointment, a quiet withdrawal that speaks louder than confrontation ever could. They don't yell. They sigh, they pause. They let the silence hang long enough for you to feel like you've failed. It's fine, I'll figure it out myself. That one sentence rewires your entire behavior. You fix. You over-deliver. Not because they asked, but because you can't stand being the disappointment. You think you're restoring harmony, but what you're really doing is betraying yourself to protect their comfort. You're not being thoughtful. You're being trained. Some manipulators don't play the victim. They play the fan. That's the trap of targeted praise. You're not like the others. You're always so composed. You're the only one I can really trust. And because part of you still aches to feel seen, you start performing. You hold it together to keep the praise coming. You keep proving you're worthy of the pedestal, and before long, you're not leading with truth, you're leading with fear of falling from grace. They're not admiring you, they're baiting you, using validation as a leash. And then comes reality distortion, the final, most silent tactic of them all. You bring up a concern and they say you're overreacting. You draw a line and they call you cold. You speak your truth and they label it drama. Eventually, you go quiet, and they ask, "Why are you being so distant?" One comment at a time, they don't erase the truth, they reframe it. They make you question what you saw, what you felt, what you knew. And once they've taken the lens you use to interpret reality, they don't have to push anymore. You'll steer yourself exactly where they want you to go. That's the most advanced form of manipulation, when you no longer trust your gut, and they never had to raise their voice to get there. But no one told you this growing up, that you don't have to be agreeable to be respected, that peace isn't real if it costs you your presence, that holding back your truth to protect someone's perception of you isn't strength, it's self-abandonment. You're not that boy anymore. You're a man. And that means this: respect isn't earned by erasing yourself. Silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's burnout. And leadership, real leadership, begins the moment you stop letting other people's emotions dictate your decisions. Jonathan Wren, The Fall of a Silent Leader. Jonathan Wren didn't lose his leadership in public. He lost it quietly, in a room where no one applauded and no one even noticed. On paper, he was everything a man should be: decisive, composed, respected. The kind of man people trusted when chaos hit. But behind the curtain, he was slowly bleeding influence. Not because someone took it, but because he gave it away, not all at once. Bit by bit, one compromised boundary at a time. It didn't start with abuse or conflict. It started with kindness. Sweet concern, soft disapproval. The way she'd sigh when he worked late. The silence when he forgot date night. The words she didn't say, but made sure he felt. So he adjusted, like any emotionally intelligent man should. He made space. He sacrificed. He softened. He became more available, more agreeable, more adaptable. He told himself it was maturity, empathy, growth. But each time he said yes when he meant no, he felt something slip. His time, his standards, his fire. Meetings became harder to focus on, conversations dulled, his leadership thinned, not in volume but in weight. He wasn't commanding anymore. He was compensating. He wasn't leading. He was appeasing. It wasn't until the day he stood in a meeting, presenting a restructuring plan he didn't believe in, but made sense emotionally, that it hit him. He was no longer speaking with clarity. He was negotiating with silence, and not from others, from himself. That night he didn't escape to a bar. He didn't distract himself with productivity. He went home, closed the door, and stared at himself in the mirror for the first time in years. Then he picked up a pen and wrote, not for clarity, but for confession. Every moment he betrayed his gut, every decision made out of guilt, every inch of leadership he gave away just to keep the peace. He wrote until the words ran dry. And in that silence, something cracked open. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a speech. It was a whisper. But it was his. And for the first time in years, he remembered what it felt like to stand for something that didn't require anyone's approval. That was the beginning. He rebuilt slow, started saying no again, softly, firmly, without guilt. He stopped apologizing for having limits. At work, he listened more and explained less. At home, he didn't chase moods. He didn't explain away his boundaries. When silence came, he let it be. He wasn't there to soothe someone else's insecurity anymore. He was there to lead, with clarity, with presence, with self-respect, and it worked. Until one evening, 6 months into this newfound stillness, his phone lit up. It was her. No drama, no guilt, just a short, quiet message. Hope you're well. Can I ask you something? For a second, his hands trembled. He felt it, That old ache, not love, not longing, just the familiar need to be needed. She wasn't coming back. She wasn't apologizing. She was asking for advice about a man she was now dating, someone who reminded her of Jonathan, but without his grounding. And in that moment, Jonathan stood face to face with his old addiction, not to her, but to validation. He almost replied, almost offered the insight, the care, the guidance. But then he remembered. Healing isn't about never being tempted. It's about not letting that temptation re-enlist you. So he put the phone down, took a breath, and didn't reply, because leadership isn't just about knowing who you are. It's about not trading that identity away, not even for a taste of the power you use to lose yourself to. That night, Jonathan Wren didn't relapse. He recommitted. And sometimes that's the quietest but most powerful victory a man will ever earn. The tactical shift, how to rebuild inner command. Taking back your mind isn't about shouting louder, proving a point, or becoming emotionally numb. It's about learning to lead yourself the same way great generals lead in war, with precision, discipline, and unshakable command under fire. This is not self-help fluff. This is mental warfare, because manipulation doesn't vanish when you notice it. It adapts. It waits. And unless you build internal structures that hold under pressure, you'll fall right back into the patterns that broke you. So let's make this real. Here are 3 tactical shifts that begin the process of reclaiming command from the inside out. Step 1. Install a personal protocol. Most people have principles until emotions enter the room. That's why Stoic leadership doesn't rely on mood. It relies on protocol, preset responses based on clarity, not feeling. You decide in advance. What do I tolerate? What earns my energy? What crosses the line? Write it down. Commit to it. Because when you're emotionally triggered, your nervous system doesn't default to wisdom, it defaults to pattern. Protocol breaks that cycle. When someone uses guilt, you don't explain, you observe. When praise feels too good too soon, you don't soak it in, you step back. When tension rises, you don't fold, you follow the code. It's not about being robotic, it's about being immune to emotional hijacking. Every military unit in the world has rules of engagement. Why? Because in chaos, clarity saves lives. Your clarity will save your power. Step 2, train the pause. You don't get manipulated in big moments. You get manipulated in the pause, that split second between stimulus and response. That's where conditioning lives. That's where guilt creeps in. That's where you override your own intuition, just to keep the peace. But Stoic discipline is born in that exact place. You train the pause like a reflex. You feel the urge to please, and instead of reacting, you inhale. You feel the sting of rejection, and instead of chasing, you exhale. You hear the baited compliment, and instead of surrendering to the spotlight, you go silent. That pause is the throne of a sovereign mind, and the more you train it, the more power returns to you. Because power isn't reaction, power is presence. And presence begins in the space you refuse to fill just to feel safe. Step 3. Fortify your identity beyond praise and blame. This is where most men break. They confuse identity with image, who they are with how they're seen. And when you outsource your worth to someone else's approval, you become a puppet waiting for applause. You work harder, give more, explain deeper, not from conviction, but from craving. Craving to be validated, craving to be liked, craving to feel like enough. But Stoic identity is built on granite, not opinion. It says, I am who I say I am, not who you need me to be to feel comfortable. That means when someone withdraws love to control you, you don't chase. When someone criticizes your boundary, you don't shrink. When someone questions your worth, you don't explain. Because your life is no longer a courtroom. You don't argue your value, you embody it. You don't beg for peace, you walk with it. You don't cling to belonging, you build a world where your presence is its own approval. This is what rebuilding inner command looks like. Not louder emotions, but quieter strength. Not explaining more, but tolerating less. Not seeking control, but walking with it. You become dangerous in the best way, and not because you threaten people, but because you can no longer be moved by their emotional weather. You become anchored, still, clear. And in a world of reactivity, that kind of stillness is revolutionary. Marcus Aurelius said it best. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength isn't found in a book. It's built, one pause, one boundary, one silent refusal at a time. The man who reclaims his mind reclaims his life. And that's what you're doing now. The silent power. That no one can steal. Most men wait for applause to feel powerful. But the Stoic man walks away from noise and stands in truth, even when no one claps. If there's one truth this entire journey has revealed, it's this. The greatest power is not something others give you. It's the authority you reclaim over yourself, silently, privately, without applause. No one steals it. You trade it each time you say yes when you mean no. Each time you silence your instincts to maintain peace. Each time you confuse being agreeable with being honorable. But today, you've seen the game. You've named the tactics. You've watched Jonathan Wren stand on the edge of relapse and step back from the ledge. Not by shouting, not by winning, but by doing what very few men ever do, choosing clarity over craving, choosing dignity over dependency, choosing to lead even when no one's watching. That is leadership, not position, not performance. But the moment you stop letting someone else's emotional weather dictate your direction. Now I want to hear from you. What was your Jonathan Wren moment? The second you saw it, the guilt, the conditioning, the quiet manipulation, and chose to stand still instead of give in. Leave a comment below, not just to share your thoughts, but to reclaim your voice. Because silence is powerful when it's chosen, but silence imposed by guilt, fear, or shame is another form of captivity. And this space, this channel, was built for the former, for the men rebuilding, quietly, strongly, strategically. If you value this kind of clarity, not the loud kind, but the kind that builds unshakable men, make sure you subscribe. We don't chase trends here, we build inner command. Quietly, relentlessly.